Shivoham. Om Nityananda Paramashivoham. Om Nityananda Paramashivoham.
All for joining us today. And I'd like to take a few moments now to share about Kumbh Mela. What is the significance of the event today and how every one of us are celebrating the Kumbh Mela in this. So, this time, the Hindu Parliament is celebrating the Global Kumbh Mela 2025. And the Kumbh Mela is actually a beautiful tradition from Sanatana Hindu Dharma. Sanatana
Aquí
Hindu Dharma,
entonces
the
estamos
Hinduism,
explicando
gives
lo que
us
es
the
Kumbh
right
Mela.
introduction about us to us. Who
Y para
we are
iniciar
really,
es una
and
presentación
how we
breve
need to hold
sobre
ourselves.
nosotros. Kailasa.
Beautifully, Sanatana Hindu Dharma says we are the favorite inheritor of the cosmos.
En
And
Sanatana Hindu Dharma
Sanatana Hindu
dice
Dharma,
que
the Hindu
nosotros somos
civilization,
los
is also the
herederos
world's
favoritos
oldest
de la
civilization that
divinidad.
continues to exist today. There are
Y
over
es
49
Kailasa
Bronze Age
es
civilizations that
la
were
más
there, and the
antigua
only
de
one
las
which is
naciones
surviving and
originarias
thriving
que todavía
is Hinduism. And there are various contributions of Hinduism to the
hay
global
varias
civilization,
contribuciones
to
del
the entire
hinduismo
world. Let's take, for
para
example,
todo el mundo.
Hindus
Unos
at
ejemplos.
one point in time contributed to 40% of the global GDP, whether it's in
Hubo
terms
un
of
tiempo en
metalworking,
que un
of
gran
silver, gold,
porcentaje
bronze,
de la
or whether it is
contribución
in
de la
terms of
economía
textile,
global
whether it is
venía
terms
solo
of
del
politics,
Sanatana
of
Hindu Dharma.
democracy. All of these, Hinduism has the
También lo que es
largest and the
democracia,
most
la
oldest
verdadera
tradition
democracia,
that is there.
originó
At
en
one point in
lo
time,
hindú.
we had over 56 nations with over 10,000 traditions.
Hubo un
But
tiempo
all
en
of
que
that was
tuvimos más de
completely wiped out
56
due to the Hindu
naciones
Holocaust.
unidas.
And if we look
Y
at the
debido a
staggering
al
numbers
holocausto,
of the Holocaust, it
la
is a
persecución,
huge number.
el genocidio,
Millions and
se
millions of
redujo
Hindus
casi a
were
nada.
massacred, were killed, tortured, and forced to convert. It is the Naga
Grandes
sadhus, the
cantidades,
sannyasis,
millones
who
de
protected
personas eran
the
asesinadas.
civilization by taking weapons and literally fought the Mughals, the invasions. And it is because of them that
De
today
los hindúes
their
eran
sacrifice
más
is
de
the reason
400
we
millones.
continue to enjoy and celebrate Hinduism. Statistically
Y
speaking,
aún así,
Hindus are the
aunque
richest
somos
ethnic minority
la
in
nación más
the
antigua,
Canada and the
hemos
US.
resistido a
Here
la
we are looking at some of the
invasión,
statistics
al
where
genocidio,
70% of
y
Hindus
hemos logrado
have an
eso
income
aún
of over
solo en
$50,000 or
defensa
more
sin
in
atacar.
the US, making Hindus as the richest ethnic minority. Similarly,
Y
Hindus
con
are
la
the most educated
diáspora
religious
de
group
los
in the
hindúes
US.
que han ido
50%
a
of
partes
Hindus
como
have
los
a
Estados
postgraduate
Unidos y el
degree,
Canadá,
and Hindus in the US have the
se han
lowest
vuelto
divorce rate.
la
And the
nación
other thing is that the
más
physicians
rica y
in the
más
US are
contribuyente
26 times
de toda
more
la tierra.
likely to be Hindu. And not to mention, so many CEOs of various top companies such as Google,
Y
Microsoft,
si se
IBM,
mira acá,
all of them are
los
Hindus.
grandes
The
directores
reason Hindus are so
ejecutivos
successful
de
is
las
because of
grandes
Hinduism
empresas son
and the
hindúes.
values that we live, which is woven into
Los
the very
valores y
fabric
principios
of
que
Hinduism
vivimos
itself.
son
And
parte de
by
la razón.
celebrating the Kumbh Mela,
Como
this
nosotros
time
celebramos Kumbh
the
Mela,
Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagwan Sri Nityananda
el
Parameshwaram,
Supremo
is taking the
Pontífice del
world's
Hinduismo,
largest, most ancient celebration global. And through this Kumbh Mela, we are
viendo
reviving
lo
the
que
true
es la
Hindu
celebración más
identity.
grande a nivel
And the Supreme
global
Pontiff of Hinduism
a
has been
los
spearheading the
Estados
Kumbh
Unidos,
Mela right from
a todo el
2006.
mundo,
And
por
all the
medio
way now
de
in
sus plataformas.
2025, we are celebrating Kumbh Mela with temples, hundreds of temples participating from various countries around the
Hay
world.
cientos de
And today
templos
marks the first
participando en
day
Kumbh Mela
of the
en
celebrations
este
of the
primer
Grand
día de
Global
la
Kumbh Mela
celebración.
2025. Looking back into the history of Kumbh Mela, it is dated back
Mirando
at
la
11,200
historia del
BCE
Kumbh
when the
Mela,
Akhadas were established by Paramashiva
todo
himself.
inició
Akhadas
cuando se
are the governing
establecieron las
bodies of
acadas.
Hinduism, and Paramashiva actually established the Akhadas to revitalize
Las acadas se
the entire
establecieron
code of conduct for the humanity. And the first and most ancient one is the
del conducto
Atalakada,
de la
which was
humanidad.
established by Paramashiva himself and was
La primera
coronated.
acada que fue
Paramashiva's
establecido
own
por Paramashiva
descendant,
mismo
Mahaganapati, was coronated as the head of the Atalakada.
inició con la
Since then,
coronación de
the next
Ganapati,
Akhada, about 2 centuries later, the
la
Akhada
segunda
tradition
acada
expanded when the Mahanirvani Akhada was
se
established
expandió
by Paramashiva, and Paramashiva appointed Kapila
y otra vez
Mahamuni
fue
as the
establecido
lead.
por
And it is
Paramashiva.
Kapila Mahamuni who created the tradition of Kumbh Mela. Till
Y
date,
esa
the Kumbh
segunda
Mela is the world's
acada
largest gathering of people, and it is the greatest celebration. This time,
se
the Kumbh Mela
constituyó.
2025 is
Kumbh Mela
happening
es
in
la
Prayag in
reunión
Bharat,
más
and
grande,
similarly,
el encuentro más
Kailasa
grande por el
Hindu
mundo,
Parliament
que
is
atrae
conducting,
más de 50
organizing the Kumbh Mela, Global Kumbh Mela
500
worldwide.
millones
And
de personas
the Kumbh Mela is a
en la
grand
celebración de
celebration,
la vida.
and this follows the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's authentic Guru Parampara, where the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is the 1008th Mahamandaleshwar of the
Nuestro
Mahanirvani
primer
Akhada,
pontífice es el
which was
1008
established by Paramashiva himself. And
pontífice
today, it is the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism who is
y es
spearheading
él
this ancient, this great
el líder
civilization
máximo
of
de
Kailasa.
la
I'd
organización
now
de
like to
las
take a few moments
Naciones
to share with every one of you
Unidas
about Kailasa
Unidas
and how Kailasa has been
y
established. The United
por
States
eso
of
todo
Kailasa
eso se ha
is the
establecido.
first nation for Hindus. It has been established
Hay
by the
gracias a
Supreme
que
Pontiff
tienen
of
misión para
Hinduism
los
to
hinduistas.
protect and revive the ancient enlightened Hindu civilizational nation.
Y es para
And Kailasa, unlike any other nation,
dar
is
vida
actually
de
very
nuevo
similar to Vatican. Just like how the
a
Vatican
las
exists for
naciones
the Roman
hindúes,
Catholics around the world, similarly Kailasa exists for
a
the
las
2
naciones
billion
indígenas.
born and practicing Hindus around the world. Kailasa serves as a
Y
central
sirve a
administrative
los
body
2.000
for the
millones
2 billion Hindu
de
diaspora around the world.
practicantes
Kailasa
y
has also established
nacidos.
various levels of diplomatic relations and various
Se han
levels of
establecido
diplomatic
muchos
engagements as
niveles
well.
de relaciones
We have also
diplomáticas
signed, for
con
example, here
diferentes
we're looking at one
países,
of the cooperation agreements that was
naciones,
signed with the State of African Diaspora in December
con
2022.
el Estado
Kailasa
de la
has its own
diáspora
sovereign
africana.
territory
Se
with
ha
its own
establecido
borders. In
relaciones
fact,
diplomáticas.
Kailasa has multiple sovereign territories, and that is the reason Kailasa is the United States of
Kailasa
Kailasa.
tiene varios
Kailasa also
territorios
has its own
soberanos
intergovernmental organizations as well.
y
Just like how
autónomos.
the United
Tiene
Nations
su
exists
propio
for the
gobierno,
modern countries around the world,
como la
Kailasa has
ONU.
established the
Está
United
organizado
Ancient Nations,
también.
that is an
Kailasa
intergovernmental body with over 100 plus
hecho
kingdoms
realidad
and
lo que
nations,
es
indigenous
las
nations that are a part of
naciones
this intergovernmental body, which serves as the United
antiguas
Nations for these
unidas.
ancient and indigenous nations and kingdoms, and
Y
primarily
eso
focused on
representa
protecting the
a
rights
las
and
naciones
promoting peaceful
originarias,
coexistence and mutual understanding,
ancestrales,
reviving the ancient
antiguas.
sacred traditions,
De
and
la misma
advocating
manera
for the
que hay la
sovereignty and
ONU,
the rights of the
hay
indigenous people
también
and
esto,
nations around the world.
especialmente para los
Kailasa
originales.
functions on its fundamental principles of ahimsa and advaita, which is nonviolence and coexistence.
Kailasa
And Kailasa has a
existe
very well
en la
established,
no
clear
violencia,
governance structure,
en
which
el
has
vivir la no
its
violencia.
very cabinet. We have the Hindu parliament, and it's a full fledged government that
Ahí
is
él
functioning.
tiene con el
And the
parlamento
fundamental principle based on which Kailasa is
nacional
functioning and the core values are towards preserving our tradition, promoting religious
y
freedom,
nuestros
and
valores
fostering cultural
principales
heritage.
son de
In this
servir
age,
a todos.
we do take Kailasa stands very strong and take significant efforts to pursue and to
Kailasa
promote
hace
the
todo
rights
lo
of
que es
our
necesario
tradition, to
para
protect our
defender los
tradition.
derechos
Despite the relentless attacks and persecution on
de
Hinduism on
los hindúes.
Kailasa and the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, we continue to voice ourselves at the various international forums and events,
Kailasa
including at
es
the
el
United
vocero para
Nations.
todos los indígenas,
And
siendo
some of
nación
the,
de indígenas.
statistically speaking, some of the big companies or some of the big CEOs of companies such as Google,
Una de
Microsoft,
las
YouTube,
empresas más
all of
grandes que
them are
reconocida como
Hindus. So
Google
it is the rich
y
Hindu
Microsoft,
diaspora who actually
sus
contribute
directivos
to
y
Kailasa.
ejecutivos son
It is the
ingleses
Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism,
y
Bhagwan
por
Sri
eso
Nityananda
las
Paramashiva,
grandes
who has
contribuciones
dedicated his entire
que
life
son todas
tirelessly
voluntarias
working to revive Kailasa as a sovereign
para
nation.
los cimientos de
Looking back into
Kailasa y
the
todo.
history of
Y el
Kailasa,
Supremo
the
Pontífice
Supreme
del
Pontiff of
Hinduismo
Hinduism
ha
has
dedicado
been
su vida
coronated
de
as the
manera
king of
completa
21
a la
ancient
humanidad,
kingdoms.
a mejorar la
Here,
vida
we're
para
looking at the
todos.
photograph of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism being coronated as the king, as the
Aquí se
293rd
puede ver la
Pontiff of
coronación
the Madurai Adinam
del
or the
Supremo
Kingdom of
Pontífice
Madurai.
del
Here, we're
Hinduismo
looking at the Kingdom of
como
Surangi, of
rey
which the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is
del
coronated as the
reino.
203rd reigning emperor.
Aquí hay
And
tres
then we have the
ejemplos.
Kingdom of Swargapuram and 18 more such ancient kingdoms. At one point in time, as I mentioned earlier, there were 56 nations with over 10,000 traditions. But because of the tremendous persecution, over 400 million Hindus
Debido
were
a
massacred,
la
95 million
tremenda
Hindus were
persecución,
tortured, and
las
3.7 million
naciones
Hindus were
que
forced to
se
convert.
unieron
And due to
antes y
centuries of
caigan
colonial
como
oppression and
fue
exploitation of
conformado
land,
y
Hindus
se
lost
perdió.
all their sovereign land. Today, due
Y
to the
toda la
untiring efforts and the
soberanía
hard work of the
se
Supreme
perdió.
Pontiff of Hinduism,
Y
Kailasa
solo
has
por medio
secured
del
sovereign
trabajo
land
duro,
from various
arduo,
countries
el
around the world.
Supremo
The
Pontífice
Supreme
del
Pontiff of
Hinduismo
Hinduism established
se ha
the Kailasa
recuperado
government in
y se
exile in
todavía dando,
2003
está
in the
resurgiendo.
North America, recognizing the persecution. At that time
Y
itself, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism established
Kailash ha
Kailasa
firmado
government in
más de
exile.
100
Kailasa also
tratados
receives
con,
customary recognition
tratados
as
con
per the very
10
convention, the United Nations
naciones
Convention on Diplomatic and
internacionales
Consular
del
Relations
mundo.
as well. And the
Los
United Nations has published over
reconocimientos como
22
nación
reports
son
affirming the
desde la ONU,
sovereignty and the
otros
juridical
países
statehood, the sovereignty and the rights that are vested in the
y la
Supreme Pontiff of
estabilidad
Hinduism and
jurídica
Kailasa.
ya
Around the
tiene
world, Kailasa has over 16,000 plus de
Kailash
facto embassies, and over 50
como
cities around the
ha
world have
sido
declared the January 3rd
respaldado
as the SPH
por la
Nityananda
ONU
Day in recognition to the contributions of the
y
Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism to the
una
entire
ley
world.
internacional.
And we continuously work to establish these bilateral
Todo el
relations.
tiempo estamos trabajando para
We
establecer
continuously
más
work
relaciones
to establish
diplomáticas
bilateral relations
con
and
otros países, con otras naciones,
to serve the entire humanity. And
solo para
Kailasa serves as a
servir.
complement to every nation, not as a competition to anyone. And I'd like to take a few moments to
Kailash
share
es
about
un
the
complemento
sovereignty.
para
In the
cualquier
international
país o
arena, sovereignty
comunidad.
is a commodity. Let's take example of the US. 25 states of the United
Vamos a
States were
ver acá
purchased
cómo
as a
la
sovereign territory
soberanía
by
puede
the
ser una
United States.
comunidad
Similarly,
también.
Kailasa has been gifted. Kailasa has acquired sovereign territories
Kailash
from
es
various
como
countries around the world, various indigenous
diferentes
nations around the
territorios.
world as well. Kailasa also has its own reserve
Aquí
bank, which is once again established similar to the Vatican
recibí
Bank, and it is the Hindu
tierra
diaspora
o
who
animal.
contribute to Kailasa. Kailasa also
Kailash
provides
tiene
e-citizenship,
su
which is a
propio
unique
banco
contribution through which we reach out to the entire Hindu
y todas las
diaspora.
contribuciones que son donaciones
Kailasa also has over
voluntarias
108
se
plus
canalizan
humanitarian
de la
initiatives.
manera
Some of the
en
top
que
ones are
todo
free food, free healthcare,
hace.
and free education. Till date, we have served over 1.5 billion free meals to the entire world. I'd now like
Hasta
to
el
take a few
momento,
moments to play a
Kailash ha
short video
servido
about
más de
Kailasa and the establishment
1.500
of Kailasa.
millones de comidas gratuitas.
Around 5,000 years ago,
Aquí es un video que va mostrando en términos gráficos lo que se compartió ahora. Aquí es el Supremo Pontífice del Hinduismo, el máximo líder, quien está asegurando que Kailasa sirva a la humanidad de manera plena. En la antigüedad surgió y siempre es basado en la iluminación de todas las personas. Y en diferentes momentos, por diferentes invasiones, todos esos territorios se perdieron. Como se puede ver en la gráfica, se fue reduciendo. Pero por la continuidad histórica,
State succession or
Entonces-
continuation. International law recognizes a state's legal personality by recognizing its identity. This perspective
está?
extends even during the period when the given state or country is annexed or occupied by a foreign power. Even in such cases, the legal personality of the state is considered to persist, enabling its subsequent re-establishment. Historical examples dating back to the 18th century include cases like Portugal and Genoa that were re-established after the Vienna Congress of 1815. More recent examples include countries such as Poland, Ethiopia, Czechoslovakia, Albania, and Austria that were re-established after World War II. Even when a nation is deprived of its territory, the nation continues to exist. Its sovereignty and international legal personality continues to persist. The Dalai Lama, as the spiritual and temporal leader of Tibet, exemplifies this principle. In 1959, the Dalai Lama was exiled and forced to flee. Despite the challenges faced, the Dalai Lama continues to advocate for the preservation of Tibetan culture and garners worldwide support for Tibetan autonomy on the global stage. Similarly, from 1309 to 1376, the Pope of Catholicism had been in exile in Avignon. Despite this, he was recognized as the head of state as well as head of the church and given full privileges of the position after their return to Rome. Even in 1861, much of the papal territories had been lost, leaving the Pope with no sovereign territory other than the papal residence and related buildings. Yet his temporal powers were still acknowledged. He was recognized as a head of state, and later, the Lateran Treaty of 1929 formally re-established papal sovereignty over the Vatican City. The Sovereign Order of Malta further exemplifies this principle, retaining international recognition as a sovereign entity despite the permanent loss of their territory upon Napoleon's invasion in June 1798. Despite such permanent loss of territory, the sovereignty and the international legal personality of the Sovereign Order of Malta continue to persist. Much later in 1894, the order settled in Rome and acquired two properties, the Magistral Palace and the Magistral Villa that received extraterritorial status. Today, the order maintains diplomatic relations with 112 countries, issues its own diplomatic passports, currency stamps, and vehicle registration plates, and has been granted observer status in the United Nations. All these examples of state re-establishment illustrate the principle of continuity of states, as per international law, that a state's legal personality persists over time. A nation continues to exist, even after a complete loss of territory. A far more striking example is of the oceanic countries, which are under the threat of their entire nation being drowned and submerged due to rising sea levels owing to global warming. In response to such existential threat of climate change, Pacific Island nations, including Tuvalu, have enacted constitutional amendments and made international declarations affirming that their nation and their sovereign rights will continue to persist, despite their entire territory being lost to the sea. This proactive stance is highlighted in the Constitution of Tuvalu Act 2023 and the Pacific Islands Forum Declaration of 2021. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nityananda Paramashiva, through the line of succession is the present 203rd Emperor of the Hindu Sovereign Kingdom of Surangi Samrajya. He was crowned on the 31st of December 2004 at the age of 26. Thus, by very same principles of the doctrine of continuity, through which the international legal personality of Portugal, Genoa, Poland, Ethiopia, Czechoslovakia, Albania, Austria, Vatican, Tibet, Sovereign Order of Malta, and several other nations has been recognized despite having undergone a period of exile, annexation, occupation by a foreign power, or despite loss of territory. The SPH Nityananda Paramashivam, through well-established legal and historical facts about the Hindu sovereign state of the Surangi Samrajyam, derives all sovereign rights and powers of the royal lineage of the Surangi Samrajyam as its 203rd sovereign emperor from his inheritance and continuation of the unbroken succession of the kingdom of Surya Vamsa Surangi Samrajyam Sarvanapitha. Surya Vamsa Surangi Samrajyam, through unification with 20 other sovereign Hindu states and sovereign ecclesiastical, historical entities, became part of the United States of KAILASA, which thus became a sovereign, independent juridical state, with the SPH Nityananda Paramashivam as the sovereign.
What we saw here is the beautiful representation of how the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has established Kailasa. And today, we are all going to be having the live darshan, the live presidential address by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And I'd also like to take a few moments to welcome the various dignitaries who have joined us along. I'd like to share and welcome all of you who are joining us. And we have various dignitaries from around the world. I'd like to take a few moments to call out every one of you. We have with us Honorable Abogado Hector Rapizo Ramirez, who is the president of Rapiz Abogadas Asociados from Colombia. Thank you very much for being here. We have the Honorable Mr. John Pahausi Argote, who is the mayor of Autonomous Municipal Government of Tiquipaya from Bolivia. Thank you very much for being here. We have Honorable Leonido Domico, who is the president of Cabildo, the mayor of Embera from Colombia. Thank you very much for joining us and being here. Next, we have Mesed Jesus Chuji Vargas, who is the president of Shami Indigenous Community from the Republic of Ecuador. Thank you very much for being here. Next, we have Adan Marcelian Vargas Canas, who is the president of Taraimiat Indigenous Community from Ecuador. Thank you very much for being here. Next, we have Luis Antonio Flores Robles, who is the president of Cantonal del Pueblo from Ecuador. Thank you very much for being here. Next, we have Agustin Senen Mariam. Thank you very much for being here. We next have Dr. Napoleon Felix, who is the mayor of Autonomous Municipal Government of Viacha from Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, we have the Honorable Ms. Kim Dawn, who is the former Deputy General at Da Nang University from Vietnam. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, we have Honorable Dr. Lam Don, who is the former head of International Cooperative Department from Vietnam. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, we have the Honorable Dr. Huong Don, who is a former Doctor of French from Vietnam. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, we have Mr. Kunal Bojwani and Mrs. Kanchan Bojwani. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, we have Julio Preto. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, we have Amrit Bandareji from Irvine, California. Thank you very much for joining us. We also have Mrs. Sulakshana and Sri Gokul Paudyal from Pashupatinath Foundation in California. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Ma Aparna Hande from California. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Swami Adrishananda from Montebello, California, USA. Thank you very much for joining us. We also have Ma Sharumati Shivakumar from Los Angeles. Thank you very much for joining us. We also have Suresh Inkur from Los Angeles. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Mr. Adesh Ashmat Ali from Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Ma Lavanga Devi Dasi from ISKCON from Santo Domingo. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Radha Sumukhi from Santo Domingo. Thank you very much for joining us. Once again, I'd like to thank every one of the important guests and the VIPs and dignitaries and statesmen who have joined us along. I know there are a lot more of the dignitaries who have joined us, but in the interest of time, I apologize for not being able to read out every one of your names, but I'd like to sincerely thank every one of you for joining us in these celebrations today. We are honored to have every one of you in this grand celebration. Let us all now prepare to receive the darshan and the direct blessings of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism on this auspicious day. Thank you, Nityananda.
I welcome you all. with my love and respects. Let you all open all your three eyes. Om Nityananda Paramashivoham. Om Nityananda Paramashivoham.